thank you for inviting me here, and thank you to those who are still here. You know, it's been a long day. I'd like to talk about work I've been doing with my collaborators at Indiana, Selma Shabanovich, Andy Gamal, and Matt Francisco. I'm Cindy Mello Silver, I guess I should say that first. And I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working on that's part of a program of design-based research with human-centered robotics as a context to engage STEM interest and STEM learning. I'll say a little bit about some of our project goals and about using human-centered robotic in the classroom. And depending on how time goes, I will talk about how we use learning outcomes to understand different implementations, and then some challenges, revisions for the future. So this is part of a National Science Foundation project that was designed to bring non-dominant populations into the STEM pipeline. So it's called Innovative Technology Experiences for Students and Teachers. And when I talk about learning outcomes, I'm going to treat them very broadly and at different levels. So let me tell you first a little bit about human-centered robotics. It involves the development of robots that interact with people in their everyday contexts and address their needs. And what you see here that you may or may not be familiar with is a Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner. And it's actually the platform that we use because they're inexpensive and we can have kids build on top of it and program it. The other piece of the work we've been doing has been to create telepresence robots so the kids can drive them from a distance and use them to communicate across fairly great distances. And our notion behind this was that we would motivate girls and other underrepresented populations by tying STEM to broader concerns, allowing students to approach STEM from various domains of interest, and letting them see different career possibilities and trajectories in STEM, as well as hopefully diverse role models. So they would see designers, programmers, psychologists. In this project, we focused on robotics applications and really highlight social context and human need. In our very first, so initially our work was to connect urban and rural kids in Alaska. And we were in Indiana. And it turned out to be really hard to do all the work at a distance. So we began playing in a local sandbox, working with a local Boys and Girls Club in an after-school activity. And we used problem-based learning principles for all our work. Our initial forays were in this after-school program, and here's an example of a ladybug robot that some of the girls designed, moving from orthographic drawings to a 3D printed prototype to a laser cut body that they put on top of it. And our initial work suggested that indeed we could get girls engaged in this robotics activity. And this one was particularly notable because when we started this, one of the girls who was a case study in this article that my graduate student, Andy Gamal, took the lead on, said, I hate computers, was her first comment to me. And I said, well, these aren't computers, these are robots. Well, they're just like computers. And she just shut me right down, and we came back a few weeks later, and she was one of the leaders in the after-school club. So we've had some pretty good glimmers of interest. We moved from there to moving into formal school context. And one of our challenges is that the iTest grant focused on just getting kids involved. And while we did do some measures of motivation, they turned out not to be particularly interesting. But all of our teachers were doing something different. Our high school teacher was, and our contexts were all very different. In Alaska, we did not really have, we had technical people on the ground, but we did not have anybody from with a social science background or education background on the ground. In addition, the high school we worked in, we were in an Introduction to Engineering course in a rural community, and it was a boarding school that served largely Native Alaskan kids. And they had a clear goal of focusing on engineering, and the kids had different things they needed to learn how to do along the way, different skills like learning to use a 3D printer. There they worked in all the schools, they worked for 5 to 6 weeks. In the high school, the kids created a robot for the same purpose that the students brainstormed together. They had common sets of parts they had to use. Like other schools, they prioritized programming, skill development, and engineering design cycle. And they also communicated with one of the middle schools. So our initial plans were that we would have the urban and rural schools in Alaska communicate with each other and get to know about each other and see each other's environments. One of our middle schools in Alaska, we worked with two, and we've got the data for one of them in here, was a program for gifted and talented students, which was not our target population. It was in an urban community, and one which would not allow us to video record anything, which created some problems for research. There, the kids worked in pairs. They worked to serve local needs, such as delivering newspapers to special education classrooms. They did some work with circuitry kits, and some instructor designed mini challenges, and that also prioritized programming and skill development. In our local middle school, it was a STEM elective in a rural community in a traditional public school, where again the students worked in groups. They created several designs for robots based on local needs and chose one. Also spent some time with circuitry kits and prioritized the engineering design cycle. A trajectory, particularly for our local school, which I realize is not showing up particularly well up there, was that the kids would start out visiting different stations to learn about different kinds of human-centered robotics applications. We then moved into problem-based learning kinds of activities where they would create charts where they tried to brainstorm what did they know about the problem, what were some of their initial ideas for their robot, what did they need to learn in order to actually be able to build the robot, and then action plans. So that's this table here, or this big part of the figure. And they moved to developing orthographic drawings, or moved to doing what we call body storming, where the kids would actually decide on the path the robot was going to run in the classroom. They would make maps of their classroom. They would develop sets of instructions and use that to send each other around the classroom and move from that to develop some initial code, then do their body prototypes and design and improve their robot. And you can see one from our most recent iteration there. So as part of our evaluation and assessment, we spent a lot of time on documenting the different enactments. And I'm going to just talk about a really small piece of it, which is our assessment of learning outcomes, which was a real challenge because, as you see, we're in a lot of different classes that didn't necessarily have the kinds of accountability requirements. So Dale and I was very jealous listening to that. You had students who were accountable for algebra and physics, and we were trying to figure out what is it we're assessing here. So in our first round, we focused on questions related to modeling and the role of creating models. We had some open-ended questions about engineering design, systems thinking, and electrical circuits. Our initial results showed, across the different schools, showed significant pre to post test gains across all 3 schools, with effect sizes from moderately to very large. So middle school B, which was our local school, was the smallest effect size, but it was also the one with the most heterogeneous population. And that was also the first time for the high school and middle school A, the teachers were on their second round. For middle school B, it was on their first round. But we also felt like we had work to do. We used some motivational instruments, and those pretty much showed us that the kids in the STEM elective engineering design class and gifted and talented kids were all pretty motivated at the start. So that analysis was not very productive. But we also felt we had work to do, especially with regards to middle school B. So we wanted to find some increased support for the more heterogeneous population there. And we did some curriculum revision to develop web resources to support the teachers and students for subsequent iterations. So in our most local curriculum, we did a lot of co-teaching with our local teacher. We wanted to do better integration and scaffolding of student roles that went along with the engineering design cycle. And we tried to narrow the focus to computational thinking and design because we were finally beginning to have a sense of where the teachers wanted to go and where the kids wanted to go. So we're in a situation where we could be really responsive to that, and we tried to do that. But we also didn't feel that our initial assessment was going to get us there, that they weren't capturing the design cycle that was such a large focus of our instruction. And although we really did not want an interview-based assessment, we felt like we were not prepared to do a written assessment until we had done it as an interview. So although the analysis is still ongoing, I can present some of the preliminary results and tell you a little bit more about the assessment and some of the challenges that we had along the way. So we developed a scenario-based assessment. Our colleagues in Alaska had developed a robot called Layla. I'm afraid if I touch the pointer, it's going to send me to the next slide. Layla was another telepresence robot that you could drive from a distance. It was, it looks kind of like a utility cart, but it's a laptop on wheels with a motor on it. And we asked the kids to redesign the Layla telepresence robot to serve in a large grocery store to make for a more unique shopping experience and to help the manager. So the students were asked to be an assistant to the manager, who said, I have a wish list of tasks I'd like to be able to do with this robot. As the manager of a grocery store, I'll use it from my office to interact with customers because I just can't leave my desk often, but want to build relationships. And then we gave them, the manager gives the students a list of the tasks to perform, to recognize when customers are entering, greeting the customers, showing them where the bulk ingredients are, showing the face of the manager and allowing them to answer questions from the office, moving around the store, alerting management when there are spills in the aisle. And then students were prompted to answer a set of questions. And let me just show you, we've got our design cycle where we looked at how students ask questions, imagine, collect information, design and test and improve. So a little bit different design cycle from the one Dion talked about, but a lot of similarities, I think. We had 12 students where we had both pre and post tests. The STEM elective only had about 15 students. This was one of our other challenges, was that we had fairly small numbers everywhere. We asked 10 follow-up questions and coded all 5 aspects of the design cycle in each question. So we coded them as 0, 1, 2 from less to more sophisticated, for increasingly sophisticated answers. So here's an example of how things were coded for the developing and testing if on the part of the question where students were asked, what will you do if your robot doesn't work the way you want it to? So a 0 might be there's no attention to developing and testing. Well, maybe I just skip the robot idea and ask a professional. or a mid-level, or a lower level. Sorry, the next level up would be the student showing some indication of developing a solution. Well, I keep it going and see what I did wrong. I basically take it apart and make sure what I did wrong and stuff. Or they might indicate for two that they would try and develop test solutions with particular attention to where the issue is. So here, just measure everything out that I need to measure, see if I got all my coding right, like if I don't make it down like from the produce all the way down to the wine and it just turns way too early and goes all the way. So this is much more specific. And this is just an example of that. We found overall gains from pre to post tests. They were right on the border of being significant. We did find that 11 of 13 students improved. So the first set of bars is the pre and post test. And then the last pre to post, the last one is the number of students improved. We also broke it down by the different steps in the design cycle to be able to see where were we doing well, or where was the design doing well and where were we not doing as well. So the big locus of improvement here was in the imagining part of the design cycle, when we asked kids to brainstorm what their robot might do. And collecting information, we did okay, but those were the big places where we did well. I would say that the improvement part, I'm not surprised we didn't do well, because usually that's about where we were running out of time. We spent 5 weeks with the students. One of our challenges, or one of our limitations, is that we opted to use the same assessment pre and post, thinking kids never remember all the questions. And here they apparently did. And so we had a couple of kids. So of the 2 kids who did not improve, they did a lot worse on post-test. And I need to go back and look and see if these were kids who said I did this already. But a lot of kids commented that we saw this already. And while yes, we should have known that, trying to keep these comparable was really challenging. So in the end, we decided to do this, to use the same setting. So another way that we tried to understand the different enactment was also looking at what did kids actually build. So here are a couple of examples of robot designs. When we were in the Boys and Girls Clubs, the kids all built low, very low designs. They didn't build up the robot so that it could actually see what they were doing. And whereas that was something that they started doing in the schools. So in middle school B, we've got a robot that could help bring audio and video to the back of the classroom and collect and deliver papers. And that was a fairly common thing. One of our schools in Alaska built a nurse robot to help the school nurse carry around, she apparently had a 22-pound bag of supplies that she carried around the school. And then the high school kids said, this is basically just a quick and easy way to get a robot into a classroom where you can remote control it from another point and put things in a homework folder. So that was sort of a rough, here are some examples that are great to show off. But we wanted to do something more systematic that would let us look at the differences in implementation and try to look at how do kids take up the design challenges in different settings as they refine their enactment, and to try and look at the effect of teacher framing over time. So especially in the first year that most of the teachers did this, there was a real focus on the technical aspects of robotics. Where in the second year, we started seeing differences and we wanted to look at it systematically. So using a qualitative coding scheme, we analyzed all the final robot artifacts that were in the collaborative groups at the 3 middle schools, the high school, and the after-school club. trying to use images and descriptions of the final robots to code for visibly obvious function, which was not as easy as I thought it would be. The social need, telepresence function, advanced components that they might create, such as laser cutter 3D printed pieces, different kinds of sensors or actuators, embellishments, safety features. And here we're focusing on one middle school that showed the greatest pre to post test, or sorry, showed the greatest change over the 2 years. And it's actually pretty dramatic if you look at the gray bars from the first year and the blue bars in the second year. The functions in the second year much more clearly reflected a social need. They very rarely or really never did that in the first year. There was very little telepresence in the first year and more of an attempt to think about that in the next year. Similarly, just embellishment for the sake of embellishment seemed to be reduced, but there was more of an emphasis on client personalization. So it's clear that the framing that the teacher was doing was really helpful in helping the kids think about the social aspects there. So I think I'm going to cut talking about it because it's been a long day. So again, this is part of an ongoing program of design-based research. We've got lots of qualitative analyses and emergent questions that have popped up as we've been in the classroom and looking at these physical artifacts that kids can play with and move around and move themselves around. It's part of our ongoing theorizing and analysis of engagement, particularly with respect to the non-dominant populations. We've been working now largely with rural kids who have not been, who tend to be underrepresented in STEM fields, as well as the kids in Alaska, but trying to find better ways to capture engagement, and we're working on video analysis now. We've also looked at the role of how the teachers have framed failure as important in this. Some of our future work, which will be one of my students' dissertation, will be increasing our participatory design for local teachers in response to both with respect to their local context and with response to current events, and thinking about how the kids can use robotics as an expressive medium. We also didn't do as well as we had hoped with our telepresence opportunities, and partly because time zones actually matter a lot. We were able to bring the kids in Alaska into our Indiana middle school, but partly because they were in boarding school and they could come in at 10 to 8 their time, so that we could have 10 minutes of interaction, which got all the kids really excited. But it was really hard to arrange. It was asking a lot of the kids in Alaska, but trying to figure out how to do some more work. What we had originally hoped to do more of, and I think is still important work to be done, is to use these telepresence opportunities as ways to build bridges across cultures in the United States. We had hoped to do that with the urban and rural kids in Alaska, and the challenges both of just getting the whole project running didn't allow us to do as much telepresence as we wanted. We have some work pending in a closer time zone where there's only a 2-hour difference, and we think that might be more manageable. And we have lots of data still to analyze. So thank you, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank some of the other graduate students and undergraduates who worked with us, as well as our colleagues at the University of Alaska who built the web-based programming tools that we use to promote these, and the National Science Foundation for funding us to do this work. So thank you, and I would be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, and everyone waiting for questions.
So there's a lot of, outside of I noticed there was one where you gave them kind of a scenario and then they were supposed to develop the cart. That was the second round, correct?
We asked them to develop something to serve a local need. So we never said develop a cart.
Okay, but, so it was just pretty much open. So when the students developed the turtle, what was the purpose of that?
We also said, develop a robot that will do something in the Boys and Girls Club. And I think we try to, over time, we try to keep it constrained to actually doing something. One of the things that we've seen throughout is that the kids took ownership when they did some kind of personalization. But for the initial group of kids in the Boys and Girls Club, for the most part, they just wanted something that would move around their club. And maybe for an after-school informal setting, that was enough.
Yeah.
But,
So then they just designed it, just made it, personalize it. So putting that image on top was just so it was their robots included.
The next year in the Boys and Girls Club, they built a snack truck that could bring snacks around, and it actually looked kind of like a pickup truck on the robot body. So if I had my computer, I could pull up my slides.
So how did they learn to program it? Like what was it like, did they just teach them the basics of coding, or how did they learn that part of it?
So they started out doing the body storming and developing pseudocode, and then I think we had examples. The coding language was pretty simple. It was mostly about
drag and drop.
No, it wasn't drag and drop. It was actually rather an ugly programming language.
Okay.
Well, it was purpose-built because it was telepresence. You couldn't control them with Scratch locally. You needed something that they could control at a distance. So we've got our Robot Moose site that the folks in Alaska set up,
Okay.
but mostly we showed them templates because it was really just move it forward, move it backward. I think they could do some loops, but it was a fairly simple program. I think they could get more complicated, but mostly they were driving it around to pick things up, drop things off, and show kids around.
Okay.
Any more questions? I see everybody's exhausted. It's very long, especially for you traveling. Okay, so I think thank you for your great presentation.